Wagner himself, and certainly all of us, have an enormous sympathy for Siegmund and Sieglinde. And we are enormously caught up in their love. Perhaps more, at least in my case I could say, really than almost any other place in the ring, from just sheer emotional involvement. There is nothing more seductive, nothing more wonderful, nothing more sort of gloriously attractive than spring and young people in love, and the whole flowering of this kind of love and spring. And Wagner captures it in the first act of Walküre as he never did again, certainly not in the ring, and as no other composer ever did. The only other work of Wagner that really has a lot of love music is Tristan, and it's utterly, utterly different there, because it means something utterly different. But this is this real, natural love, and as it should be. The motive grows directly out of Freya, the goddess of love, the goddess of nature, the goddess of spring. So there's something about this motive. And indeed, some of the most wonderful places in the love music of Act 1 of Walküre are when he reminds us of the sort of natural source of the... Don't forget this part, that first part of the Freya motive, is the part that really is about Freya as a manifestation of spring. And it's the second part, which is more directly a love motive. For instance, I just pulled the page open. There's so many places like that. That's actually even early in the scene. Now, once they get going, we hear it more and more. I think my very favorite place, maybe my favorite place practically in the entire love duet, in the area of the love duet after he's sung the Winterstürme and after she's made her answer, Du bist der Lenz, you are the spring, in this beautiful... where we hear, coming right out of all this music, again, this Freya is spring. And then there's this one place where he combines all the elements together just fantastically, I think.
In the old production, the Valkyries were doubled. I don't know if you're aware of that, but Maestro Levine asked us to all sing many of the lines together because we could not be heard otherwise. And these were some very loud voices, so this set, they didn't have to do that. And I think that's wonderful because it's more authentic. He had very specific ideas about what the Valkyries were thinking, about Sieglinde being there, for instance. And in the Otto Schenk production, it was very different. And I think more humor, actually, maybe a little, I don't know if humor is the right word, but it's a little lighter in feeling, this one. And he wanted us to embrace her being there, the Valkyries kind of being virginal and from birth being taught to be warriors. And then here's this female with a baby in her tummy, and my goodness, and what are they feeling, and trying to get in touch with some very feminine part of the Valkyries. I mean, there were very definite ideas that he had to try to have the characters relate to each other.
I think one of the important things to note is, had Wagner used the technology that he had available to him at the time, in fact, he invented some when technology wasn't then, when they didn't have the capabilities, he wanted to be able to do something. He just invented the technology. So I think Wagner would have used whatever technology was available to him at the time. I think if there'd been holograms, he would have used them. So the fact that we have this technology available to us, and the fact that we have projections and those sorts of things, it doesn't surprise me that we use them. I think Wagner would have countenanced their use.
At the time he wrote the opera libretto, Wagner would have identified the incest of the twins as the ultimate rejection of society's restrictions, an idea he had derived from his reading of the philosopher Feuerbach. Siegmund had made it clear up to this point that he is not bound by any social restrictions, but incest is a truly personal rejection of the bonds of society. This motif returns in the second act as Sieglinde sees herself as having been sullied by social norms, while he, Siegmund, had remained pure in his rejection of them. Siegmund refuses this notion as being the product of her fatigue, but it is important in the overall scheme of the ring that these twins reject society and all of its restrictions.
But for Eisenstein, the most important reason to do the production was that he had a deep artistic fascination with Wagner, going back years, and he immediately sensed that this was to be a major growth opportunity for him as an artist. As I mentioned earlier, he was interested in Wagner's idea about the total artwork, about all the art forms coming together. He was also very interested in the theme of mythology. And he privately studied and read a great deal about myths and mysticism, more and more so as the years passed. In fact, that was one of the main things that got him in trouble with the Soviet authorities. One of the reasons given for the destruction of the footage on his most recent film, Bezhin Meadow, was the mythological references in Eisenstein's imagery and Eisenstein's screenplay. The film was supposed to be a propaganda piece about Soviet collective farming, no more and no less. So in Wagner, Eisenstein had an ideal vehicle for exploring myth, and one that was officially sanctioned. I think that Eisenstein's production for the Bolshoi is extremely relevant to many of the approaches that we've seen in the new productions of The Ring in the last few years. The new Ring cycle at the Met, the multimedia Ring in Valencia, Spain, the new Ring cycle in La Scala. In different ways, they're all continuing Eisenstein's approach. In fact, I don't know whether or not Robert Lepage delved into Eisenstein's staging when he was preparing the production for the Met, but some of the similarities are striking. The importance of moving scenery, the use of a flashback film strip for Siegmund's narrative in Act 1, Brunhilde rising towards the heavens during the magic fire music. Even the thunderclouds that are a video projection over the prelude resemble the opening of Ivan, which we saw, and which was inspired by the Walküre prelude. Similarly, Valencia's Ring cycle with its extremely colorful, eye-popping 3D animations is continuing Eisenstein's approach, and in the La Scala production, the corps of dancers is in some ways similar to Eisenstein's pantomime choruses. We seem to be entering a new period of staging Wagner. I would call it a cinematic period. I call it that not only because film and projections are often used in these productions, but because a defining characteristic of the productions is that the staging is very fluid and changeable, almost cinematic in that sense. It's rejecting stationary sets very often. Eisenstein's Die Walküre was the inaugural production of that approach. That is what he meant when he said, "I've got it," in his production notes. What he got was the changing, moving, expressive staging of a Wagner opera. His production of Die Walküre was canceled after 6 performances, but he was looking forward to what is now taking hold on international opera stages 70 years later. I think that's a good thing, because as much as Eisenstein was looking forward, he was also looking back to the ever-changing musical montage that lies within Wagner's work itself. We now have many productions that are aiming to be, as Eisenstein said, sharply defined, palpable, frequently changing. They will all be different, some will be more successful than others. But to borrow a word from Eisenstein, this approach to Wagner is indeed the Obraz, the true image. Thank you.